I'm Zabriskie with Symantec. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. When Guy Kawasaki was talking, for some reason, memories started flowing into my mind. I think he kind of took us back, took us all back to some places we haven't lived in a while. And I was thinking about my father, who 2 years ago this week passed away. My dad was a very successful salesman. And he was a product of World War II. He came out of World War II, went to work, no high school diploma. But in the 1970s, he had built a business to where he was making $250,000 a year selling paper, computer paper. He started with punch cards. And then he got into building checks and invoices. But where he made most of his money is on this 15-inch green bar paper. Remember that stuff? And you think about what life was like back then. If you wanted to get information, if you wanted to access a piece of data, you had to do what? You had to print it, right? There were really very few monitors to look at. It was all a matter of putting something on a piece of paper and delivering it. He was so successful, I remember when I was in high school in 1972, I was, in the summertime, I was delivery boy. And we would go in Houston, Texas, where we lived at the time, every Thursday to Shell Oil Company. And we would take 450 boxes of 15-inch paper. Every week, they would take 450 boxes. They would print that much paper. So remember the old line printers? 126 characters, 6 lines per inch, and that was all you could get. So I did a little calculation because it used to bother me. I said, how much data could you get on 450 boxes of 15-inch green bar pin feed paper? So I did the math for you. Anybody want to guess? 2 CDs. Mr. Krause is absolutely correct. 1 gigabyte. All I remember is that the boxes were 50 pounds each. And who knew a gigabyte could weigh so much? I hold in my hand 900 cases of 15-inch green bar paper. This is a 2 gigabyte thumb drive. Think about where we've come from. And who's carrying a 64 gig iPod or iPad with them? Phenomenal shift, hasn't it? This tremendous shift that we've talked about. Think about what Guy told us this morning. He talked about the fact that there are in 1943, where IBM said there would be 5 computers in the world. Isn't that what cloud computing is going to be? Eventually, aren't we kind of going there, right? It was full circle. But it's all about the flow of information. You think about what's the fastest way for you or for your CIO to get a phone call from your CEO. Turn their email off. You want to talk to the person? Shut their email down. They'll call you real fast. It's all about this flow. As Dan said this morning, right? It's air. IT is air. We just breathe it. Just happens to us, right? It just flows with it. And so in order to achieve that, there are all these elements that have come. And we've hit these milestones. For me, as my father was winding down his career, I started my career at technology at IBM in 1981. So now I'm going to really date myself. What did we get from IBM in 1981? A PC. That was the year that the PC came. And there was, as Guy mentioned this morning, there were people who were thinking, what would a person want with a computer? It didn't make any sense. And there was no Ethernet port on the back of the first 64K, 2 floppy green screen, 4 megahertz boat anchor, right? But what has happened to us since then? What has connectivity done? As productivity has increased, data has become critical. Infrastructure is so important. You hear people talk about cloud. Well, cloud, no infrastructure. Some statistic I read recently that by 2015, 20% of all US businesses will have 0 IT assets. Now you gotta have a laptop, I guess, but, right? Now that's interesting. You think about that. But there's still infrastructure somewhere. And now our discussion is around things like big data. We talk about this amazing amount of information that we're collecting. So when you look at the last even decade of our lives, the increase of information, the amount of information, the requirements to keep that information, and the requirements to keep that information flowing has never been greater. And now, as you look at milestones, you think about the internet coming on board, or the PC, the internet, what cloud means, all these pieces of and points of innovation along a timeline. Things that have happened to us. There's always been something exploited at the time. The first computer virus was a thing called Brain in 1986. And how was it propagated? How was brains moved from one machine to another? A floppy disk. Sneaker net, right? You plug it in there, and you walk over here, plug it in there, and you walk over there. And that's how you propagated it. To where now we talk about zero-day vulnerabilities, amazing things that are happening that are spinning our heads left and right because of connectivity, because of the amount of information that's out there, and the importance of that information. One of the things that Symantec has done over the years, since its inception in 1982, is in the market leader in protecting information. And in 2005, we acquired a company called Veritas. And at the time, it was, why would a security company want a storage company? Didn't seem to make sense. They were two diametrically opposed processes for IT. But look at what's happened in the industry since Symantec and Veritas came together. IBM acquired Internet Security Systems. EMC acquired RSA. Cisco, IronPort, and others. HP, ArcSight, Fortify, et cetera, et cetera. Because the focus is that you have to think differently about protecting information, which is the most important thing. Have you ever said in your group, in your company, we could really get a lot of things done if it weren't for all these damn customers that keep on us? Right? The customers would just leave us alone, we could really get things done. Its same attitude is that if we could really get things done if it weren't for all this information that I have to back up. But it is the lifeblood of your organization. So here's a quiz for you. What do these numbers represent? We've talked a little bit about the past decade. Obviously, this second column is years, right? These represent from Symantec the average number of antivirus signatures that we wrote per day. So 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we were pretty bored. Didn't have much going on. 2007, we were hitting 1,400 today, until in 2010, we wrote 786,000 antivirus signatures per day. Now, hopefully that dismisses the myth that Symantec writes all the viruses so that we can stay in business. Because we don't do this for fun. That's 287 million new malware viruses in 2010. But that's just a tip of the iceberg. Because when you count all of the different pieces of malware that occurred that year, 3.1 billion unique malware attacks in 2010 alone, of which about 287 million were approached, targeted, were fought against, if you will, through signatures. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the game has changed, and that the aspect of antivirus, while it's very important and necessary, is not the way to strictly defend yourselves. It's not a matter of saying, well, I have antivirus and I have a firewall. It's essentially saying that you've taken your information, you've put it all in the middle, you've dug a big ditch, and you fill it with water and put alligators in it. And you say you can't get in. But look at what's happened in the world, in our industry, over the last just 18 months to 2 years. Breach after breach after breach of organizations which have a very, very strong perimeter. And so, where do we go with it? It's a changing world. There's one thing that we call hacktivism. This is fascinating to me, that some group, loosely defined as they may be, will come out. Recently, it was the state of North Carolina where there were 70 different entities that had data that was breached. And this group, whatever you want to call them, came out and said, yeah, we did that. Yeah, that was us. Very open, very blatant. It used to be very quiet in the sense of you couldn't find out who was doing these things. But they were very, very noisy attacks, disrupting of systems, of websites. Now it's targeting information. And this focus of social aspect, right, trying to make a social statement, is having a huge impact on information regardless of where it sits, in any organization, large or small. Certainly there's a lot of state, nation-state type of work that's going on when you look at Russia and China, Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. I just returned from an assignment in Europe where I lived in London for a year, was in Egypt. I was actually in Saudi Arabia when the Egyptian uprising took place. That's an interesting experience. I was booking the next flight out, is what I was doing. But you know how that happened? Really, it was one person in Egypt on a cell phone that said, on Thursday after prayers, meet at Tahrir Square. One guy. And 100,000 people showed up. This social aspect, this attitude of access to information is having a massive impact on the protection of information. And we're only going to see more and more of this. The aspect of cybercrime. This has been the trend that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years, where we've gone to be monetized, the aspect of monetizing cyber activities. You can go out on the internet today, you can buy all sorts of identities and information. By the way, I'm waiting for my $10 million check from a guy in Nigeria. I don't know if you are. Anybody? Yeah, good. Okay, good. Let me know. Let's find out when that happens. Why do we get these emails? I mean, come on. Why? They work. There's some little old lady in Poughkeepsie saying, oh, that poor little person, let's take care of her. And my wife worked, you'll appreciate this because you're from Seattle. My wife, see if you're old enough to remember, Seattle Trust Bank. Okay, it was going way back. My wife was a teller when we were first married 34 years ago, believe it or not. And she would, it was back when they had the cards, when the little lady would come up to the window, she'd want a deposit or something, she'd have to go back and get the card out, and this was the balance, you know, it was written on a piece of paper. She'd bring it out and say, you know, okay, and do the transaction and everything. It blew her mind that these little old ladies that had millions of dollars in the bank. You know, and they're just walking around, you know, you're helping them across the street and they're millionaires. And that's what's happening. In fact, in 2009, Symantec helped identify one of these guys in Nigeria who in the first 6 months of 2009, the guy made $40 million. Jeez. Because we're stupid. We're just stupid people, right? We do things like that. There's a whole monetization of this. The Russian Business Network is a huge group out of Russia. Just seeing if you're with me. Okay, good. How many hands am I holding up? Anybody? All right, good. Excellent, good. You guys are sharp. I love it. All the dumb people are out there eating. So this is a special. You're the special. You're the people that are on the plane. You know, when you're on the plane, all the good stuff's usually on the other side. When the pilot comes on, it's on your left. You'll see. You're always on the right. Does it seem like that? Today you're on the left. Because you're all right. Russian Business Network, organized crime is essentially what it is. And it's this huge monetization. There is more money transacted in cybercrime today than in the international illicit drug trade. Colombia has nothing on cybercrime. It's remarkable what's happening out there. Now we're dealing with this cyber espionage and cyber warfare. Kind of a combination of those is what happened in 2010 with this thing called Stuxnet. Stuxnet was a threat that nobody knows where it came from. It was extremely sophisticated and targeted primarily centrifuges in Iran that were enriching uranium. Now, I don't think anybody in this room is in the business of enriching uranium. Anybody? I don't think so. But what's significant about Stuxnet is that for the first time, a cyber threat physically controlled something. It physically controlled centrifuges and changed the way they were spinning. The other thing that it did is think about process control. Think about manufacturing, utilities, what about those networks? What's unique about the networks associated with things like utilities? They're isolated. They're not connected to the internet. But somehow this threat got through that, jumped the air gap, and started exploiting what was inside. And now we're seeing this thing called DUQU, D-U-Q-U, that is a son or brother or second cousin once removed of Stuxnet, because it's sharing code. And so we need to sit up and take notice and be aware. So let's talk a little bit about the framework of a data breach, because what we've seen is a very organized approach that's often done by unique groups. What's the first thing that happens? Well, they have to get in, right? Think about Sony. Sony had a breach recently. How did someone get through Sony PlayStation? Anybody know? What did they appear to be? Sorry? No. What do you do with your PlayStation at home?
Play games.
Play games. Thank you. You will be in the bonus round, sir.
Thank you.
In order to play those great games, sometimes what do you have to do?
Download.
You have to, and before you download them, you
Connect it to it.
you pay for them. So what did the threat that got into Sony appear to be? A transaction. Payment. Exactly. And what is Sony going to say if somebody wants to give them money?
Sure.
Come on in. Order's mine. And when you look at the threats that have happened, these major data breaches, the weekly data breach poster child, whatever it is, there'll be a new one next week, all started with this idea of coming in looking like something else, or getting through the defenses. Do you think Sony has a strong perimeter defense? You bet they do. Our friends at RSA had a similar problem a couple of years ago. Did they have a strong perimeter? You bet they did. But somehow or another, they got in. So there's this group of people. That's their job, is to get in. What's the second thing that happens is to go in and then look around. And often there are different teams. So there can be an infiltration team or an incursion team, and then there's a discovery team. This is the group that goes around, and it's like rummaging through your purse. If you're a woman, right? You're standing there. I don't know any men who carry purses. It doesn't really matter, does it? We have the rose here among the thorn in the center section. Anyone that, stand next to you and start, no, one of those, you wouldn't let them do that, would you?
No.
Probably not. You had to think about that for a moment. That was interesting. Depends on who it is. I know for my wife, it's like, where is it? I mean, it's in your purse. It's in my purse. I go, you find it. That's okay. I don't think I want it. So, and that's what they do, is they look around and they get a funny thing. There's some smash and grab, that's happened to my wife in Piccadilly Circus in London. Somebody just grabbed her purse, ran off with it, went around the corner, took her iPhone out and a bunch of other stuff, and threw the purse in a bin, right? There's some of that going on, but it's very focused and organized on finding stuff. What is it? What's important? Understanding the layout of that network, right? Then the next team that comes in is all about getting it. Once we understand what it is, now we have to understand how to get a hold of it. And there's teams that do that specifically. The specific information. And then the last thing, as you might imagine, is how do we get it out? And these are often individual teams that have a responsibility of each one of these processes. So it's extremely organized. It may be contained in one piece of malware, but often it contains, because if they can get in and do a command and control type thing and start talking. You guys remember about 7, 8 years ago, TJ Maxx had a data breach? They were like the first big poster child for data breach. Some guy, Alberto Gonzalez, got in there with a team and sat inside TJ Maxx for months, just siphoning off credit card numbers, before anybody realized what happened. And in the investigation of that data breach, there was an email that came from the VP of IT, sent to his higher-ups, saying, our wireless protocol that's used in our stores, and the security on that wireless protocol is not good enough. We need to change that. And then he used these words. He said, it must be a risk we are willing to take to save money. Well, they took that risk. And it cost them a reduction in their market value of some 45% when it happened. Because the cost of this is much more expensive to remediate than it is to prevent. That's what statistics show. Here's what you're dealing with, folks. It's the burnt marshmallow syndrome. You guys been to campfires, right? You got your stick, your coat hanger. You're roasting your marshmallow. Start talking to your buddy, and pretty soon you pay attention, and then all of a sudden you don't have a marshmallow. What do you have? A torch, yes, right? You're blowing out, you got a burnt marshmallow. What's happening on the outside of that burnt marshmallow? Very hard and crunchy, isn't it? This is your perimeter. What's happening on the inside of your marshmallow?
Soft and chewy.
Very fluid, very gooey, moves around a lot. And this is what we see, is that the data breaches and all these things that have happened in the world have been caused by internal processes. The perimeter is there. Anybody in this room not have antivirus at your locations? No. You know, I saw a statistic once that said 99% of companies have antivirus. Really? 1%? Who are they? That's what I'm going to sell them something. That's what but the other statistic was that 68% still get viruses because the technology by itself is not enough. So you have to think about what's happening on the inside, what's going on the inside. And this is really what the reality is, okay? The reality is that most people don't know. 88% of surveyed in a Verizon study did not even know they had a data loss. This is the big key. This is Albert Gonzalez and TJ Maxx. 88% did not know they had it. Huge percentage of employees take data when they leave. Anybody in your company over the last 5 years of the recession had to do a reduction in force? You know, we all kind of lived through that, right? Many of you had to live through that and are now somewhere else. Most people take information with them. Because why? They can. That's exactly right. They have access. The other aspect of it is the cost, right? What does that say? $7.2 million in an average of data breaches? It's about $318 per record. So the number has gone up quite a bit, but 7 years ago, TJ Maxx lost 143 million records. You do the math. Anybody want to write the check? Nobody wants to write the check, right? Because it's extremely expensive. And with that comes the legal, the compliance issues, and the fact of the corporate black eye or the reputation. And really, what do the CEOs care about when it comes right down to it with a large organization? It's reputation, right? I don't want to be in the news for the wrong reason. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the faces of data loss prevention. We broke it into three. You have your well-meaning insider, you have your malicious insider, and your malicious outsider. Malicious outsider, appropriately in black turtlenecks, like he's from Ukraine or something, one of those Eastern Bloc states. Did that on purpose, of course. But these are the three major areas where things happen. And it is, as it says there, right? It's all about carbon-based life form units. That's the biggest threat to any organization. You are the biggest threat to your organization. My colleague Bob Krause is with us today from Symantec. Bob is the greatest risk to Symantec. Risky. At least we know where he is today. Just stay right there in the front row. Don't move. This is what the problem is. And now think about the fact that what has happened in our world today, how many of you carry more than one mobile device with you today? Probably the majority of this room, right? And how many of you have corporate information on that mobile device? Okay, right? So we trust you as carbon-based life form units to do that. Now, what would happen if your organization said, no, you can't have that? You would what? You would quit, right? You'd go somewhere else. You know what Cisco did? Cisco had a survey recently, and they looked at call them generation X, Y, Z. I don't know, we're going to get up to AA, double B, whatever it is. Whatever the next generation is. The workforce out of college, working young adults 19 to 30. And you know what? They said that they categorized internet access at the same level as food, love, and shelter. What's that? Crazy. Yes, that's right. Can't live without it, all right? So these are the basics. This is where it happens. And so we have to look at it from the standpoint of being a non-transparent solution. What do I mean by that? How do you prevent the loss of data in a non-transparent way? This is what I want you to think about. I've got a few things I want you to take away from our discussion today. If it's transparent, then what's your association or reaction to it? There's no behavior change, right? I don't care. It's not real to me. And this is what you have to do. It has to involve people. You have to blank over the faces, as it says, and think about these things. Where is your data? Who has access to it? And how do you prevent the loss? Now, let's think about it. Let's go back in time for a second. We talked about the growth. We talked about a little bit about history. Let's think about the information that you have in your environment. I had a CIO recently tell me this. Let's see if it resonates with you. He said, 85% of my data is irrelevant. And then he said, I just don't know which 85%. Okay? See, now we're getting this dog in the back of the Chevy action here. We got the heads nod. You guys are playing, living that dream, right? Because we have all this stuff. And now what do you do with that stuff every night after everybody's gone home, essentially? You back it up, right? Do that every day. Anybody running out of storage capacity? Anybody not meeting their backup windows? Yeah, okay, we're all living the dream, right? Here's why. It's because you're treating your information like it's of the same value. All of it is the same value. If you were to take your wallet out and open it up, I would bet you 20 bucks, maybe I better be careful with this, better make sure I have 20 bucks, that all the bills in your wallet are not the same. You've got some ones and fives and tens, whatever, right? That's what we walk around with. Your data is the same. If the data is the lifeblood of your information, of your organization, then it is of different value. So how do you determine what that is? This is how you answer that question. What's at the heart of a data loss prevention technology? Really? It's classification. It's understanding what you have. Because you can't make decisions about it until you know what you have. So where is it? What is it? Who has access? How do I prevent it? First has to be done. First step in that is dealing with categorization. Anybody trying to go to the cloud? Well, I'd love to talk about that. We won't today. Okay? Cloud, right? Cloudy? Foggy? What's your biggest concern about going to the cloud? Everybody says security. Wrong. How do you decide to go to the cloud? How do you decide what information you're going to put in the cloud? You have to understand what it is first. It's a strategic decision. And a data loss prevention technology is designed to help you understand what you have so that you can make the right decision and move to the cloud. So it's discover, it's monitor, it's protect. That's how we do it, right? Understand what you have, protect the flow, monitor the activity, or protect the leaving of it. So here's the thing I want you to take away. In this financial crisis and all the election years, I'm going to give you a little acronym that will be easy to remember. It's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. Focus, right? What's the D? Design, implement, communicate. Now that's a circle, but let's start with focus. It starts about what, right? You have to identify what's most important. What's the critical stuff? And if you lost it, all hell would break loose. When you understand what that is, think about that for a minute. When you understand what's critical in your environment, Now you can make decisions about how you back it up, or where you store it. Or when you determine what's critical in your organization, you also determine what's not so critical. And then what can you do with that? Delete it. I know that's a scary idea, but it's also one of the most therapeutic things you can do. Delete some information. It's a great experience, it's a great feeling. You see that little meter peg, right? So you got to focus on that. You got to design. You have to be involved. You have to understand what are we trying to achieve. The implementation process is all about, and we'll talk about a little bit more in detail. I want to show you one more picture about that. Because the implementation is a long-term, serious journey, if you will, of determining what works. And then as you communicate back, you're communicating to the business, you're communicating to the owners of that information, you're communicating, most importantly, to the stakeholders or the executives, because that's often where the data loss prevention challenge is. We offer, as a company, a number of risk assessments. One's a malicious activity assessment. We also offer a data loss prevention risk assessment. And what's fascinating about both of these, especially the DLP risk assessment, is when we're asked to come in and look at activity on your network, about the flow of information, and see what things people are emailing, or copying, or printing, or whatever. It is an eye-opener like you can't believe. We take that report and we put it in front of the executives, and 70% of the time, people sign the deal. Because that information is so valuable to them. To be able to say, wow, I had no idea. So if you're considering data loss prevention, do not do it unless you really want to know. Because it could be an oh blank moment for a lot of people. So remember FDIC, right? Focus, design, implement, and communicate. And you find this just being a circle. Now here's another way to look at it. Workflow of data loss prevention. 90% of DLP is incident response. And look at some of these numbers, right? It's automation done correctly. It's the right person gets the information. When an event happens, it's got to go to the right person. It also has to be done in the right order, because some things aren't as important, right? Here's a case in point. We had a guy in our sales office, John, I'll say his name. John is his name now, right? He downloaded a thing called Zabriskie. Anybody familiar with Zabriskie? It's inbox backwards, okay? It's a cool little Outlook plugin, right? You know what its problem is, though? It opens a conduit from your Outlook contacts to the internet. Oh, oops. Okay, might be an issue. So we put this on our watch list with our data loss prevention. John downloads Zabriskie, sitting in his office. 90 seconds later, the phone rings. Hi, this is John. Hi, John, this is Bob over in legal. Now, if you're a salesperson and legal calls you, what do you tend to do? You sit up, right? You hang up. I can't hear you. Sorry, that's connection. Right. That's what you do. No, you pay attention. And legal, Bob over legal says, yeah, did you just download this Omni client? Yes, I did. She says, yeah, that's on our watch list. We're concerned about it because it opens up this conduit Outlook. We'd appreciate it if you would delete that. Okay. Now, John is the DLP poster child. How much more impact does that have on John than going and sitting at a training session? See? This is the thing. It's the experience that has to happen. And this is what had happened. Right information, the 5-second test. Can someone make a decision based on the text, the email, the phone call, whatever they get? Can they make a decision within 5 seconds? This is how you make it happen. And then it's got to be a one-click response, and you've got to have the metrics to prove this, because it is an ROI to a certain extent. Part of the challenge with security is that the people who write the check to buy the security technology, they look at it as insurance, right? And go, do we have a virus? Do we have a virus? I don't have a virus. We have a virus. I don't have any problem. You want me to spend money on something that we don't have a problem with? And it's not a fear game. It's a reality-based game. And these things help you move in that direction and communicate back. One more. It's time. It's risk reduction over time. So we talk about visibility, right? Visibility is seeing what you're looking for, understanding what the critical information is, knowing where it's at, understanding its value. Then the remediation comes as you start to fix things, right? You start to tweak things. But look at the slope on notification. This is what is fascinating that we see on these implementations. Because of the carbon-based lifeform units that sit there and they download information or they email themselves something to their Gmail account, the system will pop up and say, are you sure you want to do that? Or it can pop up and say, we're not going to allow you to do that, depending on how you set it up, right? How you design it. And what happens 99% of the time is that when the person does that, what's their reaction when they do it? Oh, sorry, that was me. I'm sorry, that was really stupid, I won't do it again. It has amazing impact. We've seen these implementations. Bank of America is one, that over a 12-month period of time of just doing notification, not stopping anything from happening, just notification resulted in a 90% reduction of incidences in a 12-month period of time. Because the carbon-based lifeform units are going, yeah, that was really stupid. Because the thing pops up and says, you don't want to do this, and we've let so-and-so know that you tried to do this. And here's a link to our security policy, which you might want to read. Just saying. Again. Okay? Powerful, powerful stuff. So in closing, let me leave you with this idea. It's all about intelligence of your information. Think about where you're trying to go as an organization, what you're trying to achieve. There's a foundational element, an infrastructure. And this represents whether it's physical, virtual, or whether you're doing cloud, there are certain elements that must exist. You must have security, endpoint management, backup and archiving, storage management, availability. These are all foundational building blocks that must exist with your infrastructure. Where do you want to go? Where's the happy place? It's up high. We call it governance. We used to call it compliance, but compliance is a negative word, right? Nobody wants to be compliant. And governance is a much happier word. We even put good in front of it, makes it even happier. Good governance, right? It's a happy place. But think about that. That's where compliance lives and breathes. That's where you have understanding of what you're doing, policy, remediation, all these wonderful things. How do you get there? Our belief is that you put in the middle of this, call it the filling, call that the third heaven, whatever you want to look at it as, is all about intelligence. It's all about understanding what you have, where the critical stuff is, who owns it, how to encrypt it, how to authenticate it, identity. All these things go into ensuring that you have governance in your space. You've got to do the basic stuff, has to happen, but let's get off the hamster wheel of backing everything up and storing everything and not having enough space or power or everything to keep things going. And apply a layer of intelligence to your all-important information. Because when you do that, you will make the right decisions. And you will have a much more efficient environment. So think about the future of what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to go, and understand that Symantec as an advisor and as a partner with you, with Trace3, can help you achieve those goals by giving you this visibility. To remember to focus. Right? What is it? FDIC, focus, design, implement, communicate. You do those things with the right intelligence, that's when things start to happen for the right reason. And you start to turn IT more into an enabler of the business rather than just a roadblock of security. Have a great time. Great to be with you. Thanks so much.